Witam pana prezesie, witam pana konsuły, witam wielebne księży i siostry zakonne, witam szanownych państwa. Mr. President, officers and directors of the American Polish Cultural Society, Reverend Fathers and Sisters, ladies and gentlemen. 40 years ago, in 1985, when Poland was still under communist control, a group of patriotic Polish Americans founded the AECS in order to safeguard and ensure that Polish culture would endure in Michigan. These founders and their successors chose the name of this organization carefully, calling it the American Polish Cultural Society. The name itself is interesting and worth deconstructing in order to understand its mission. Underpinning the organization's name are the words Cultural Society. What is culture? Culture is a group's shared set of values, beliefs, customs and traditions, language, food, art, music, and even religion. And a society is a group of people that share that common culture. But we should ask, what is the specific culture that is being referred to? It seems that there are two possibilities here. One is a Polish-American culture, and the other is an American-Polish culture. There is a difference. Even grammatically, a Polish-American culture is the value system and traditions of those people of Polish descent residing in the United States. So it could include many traditions and values observed by Polish Americans, but not necessarily the ones that are part of or have been part of the culture in Poland. For example, one could say that things like polka dancing or an obsession with kielbasa and pierogi or meeting at the corner bar could be part of a Polish American culture. But these things are not how one would describe Polish culture. Now, there's nothing wrong with polkas, kielbasa, or bars, and I certainly enjoy all of them. But the founders of this organization chose to name it the American Polish Cultural Society. Again, grammatically, in this name, the principal object and emphasis was on the Polish aspect, the culture, or call it the high culture of Poland. And that makes a lot of sense. Indeed, the original Articles of Incorporation of this organization, filed on December 23rd, 1985, stated the first and main purpose of the organization to be, quote, to encourage the participation of Americans of Polish descent in the pursuit of their Polish heritage and culture. I couldn't have written it any better. So throughout the years, especially since the APCS purchased this building in 1989, the American Polish Cultural Society has been a key meeting place and host of many events commemorating our Polish culture. For a very nice history, I refer you to the program. But now I would just like to focus on one of these events, the annual Chopiniana, a celebration of the music and genius of one of Poland's most cherished heroes, Frederick Chopin. As we all know, this event was Jackie Kowalski's passion. For the past 12 years, as the chair of Chopiniana, she was devoted to promoting this concert and event. And it was always a great success. We thank Pani Kowalska for all she has done for the AECS in Polonia and pray for her soul. From an artistic perspective, Chopin is so admired by many throughout the world because his compositions are so beautiful. One of his closest friends, as Professor Brzozowski said, a Hungarian composer, Franz Liszt, wrote, Chopin's works are compositions of a poet. They are not merely music, but poetry translated into sound. For Jaddy, as for all of us, there's an added bonus in celebrating Chopin, his deep Polish identity. His compositions have been described as music that vibrates the soul of Poland. As Franz Liszt also said of Chopin, he was a Pole to the core, yet his spirit was steeped in the poetry of his country. Sometimes we hear uninformed and uneducated saying that, hold on, while Chopin's mother was certainly Polish, his father was French. That means Chopin only had Polish. Well, that's really not the story. Yeah, it's true that Frederick Chopin's father, Nicholas Chopin, was born in France. But his father left France and went to Poland together with his Polish tutor when he was just 16 years old and never returned back to France. And when in Poland, Nicholas Chopin legally changed his first name to Mikołaj. Even more interesting, when Russia invaded Poland to quell a national rebellion led by Tadeusz Kościuszko, Mikołaj joined the Polish militia in Warsaw and was placed in charge of a detachment of Polish soldiers and fought in the Polish insurrection. Several years later, when he was 35 years old, Mikołaj met Justyna Krzyżanowska, who was 24 at the time, and they married. A couple years later, Frederick was born, and he was certainly raised in a Polish household. Undoubtedly, Chopin's Polish background had a profound and unique influence on his music. He was a distinctively Polish composer and incorporated into most of his music the characteristics of Polish dances, especially the mazurka, Polonais, Krakowiak, and Numery. His songs were all set to Polish texts, and several have a distinctively patriotic note, such as the Revolutionary Etude and the Scherzo B minor. In November 1930, when he was 20 years old, Chopin left Poland for a planned brief trip to Vienna. But just a few weeks later, after he left, the November uprising of 1930 occurred. It erupted against Russian rule in Warsaw. So Chopin did not return to Poland, but made his way eventually to Paris, where he joined other Polish exiles and patriots. On his way to Paris in Stuttgart, he had learned of the crushing of the November uprising and wrote this in his diary. The suburbs of Warsaw are destroyed, burned. Jasz and Milusz are probably dead in the trenches. That good man Sowiński in the hands of those Russian brutes. Moscow rules the world. Oh God, do you exist? You're there and you don't avenge. How many more Russian crimes will you forbid? It was during his short time in Stuttgart that he composed his most patriotic pieces, the Revolutionary Etude and the Scherzo in B minor. I recently learned that one of Chopin's compositions, the Opus 38 Ballade, is the subject of an interesting quote by an author, a musical historian, Jonathan Bellman. The author describes this piece of Chopin as a tale of the martyrdom of the Polish nation, in which Chopin wanted to transmit the story of Poland's tragic fate through his music. So in the first part of this ballade, there is a serene sotto voce melody in F major, representing paradise or the Garden of Eden, a time that Chopin lived in Poland before the November uprising. This is followed by a dramatic change in the second theme and a change to the key of A minor, like a sudden violent battle representing the nation's struggle for freedom in the November uprising. And finally, the third theme in this piece is a recurring pastoral rhythm with the shades of the first theme, but it stays not in the original F major, but in the key of A minor, representing the unfulfilled dreams destroyed by the Russian crushing of the November uprising, and an agonizing memory of what could have been, but was still not realized. As you can probably tell, I very much enjoy reading about Chopin and his music. But let me conclude by saying a few words about Chopin's heart. I'm sure you've heard the story. Chopin died in Paris in 1849 when he was only 39 years old. He did not leave a will, but in his last days, while he was near death, he instructed his caretakers, "Remove my heart after I die and take it to Poland." So after his death, they embalmed Chopin's heart in a jar of cognac. But given the Russian occupation of that part of Poland, they were unable to deliver the heart to Warsaw, because the Russians viewed Chopin as a Polish patriot. But 10 years later, Chopin's sister, Ludwika, managed to smuggle his heart back to Warsaw. Eventually, his heart was interred in a pillar of the Holy Cross Church, Kościół Świętego Krzyża, near the Old Town in Warsaw on Krakowskie Przedmieście. You can visit that site and that church today, which I strongly recommend. On that pillar, there is a plaque that reads, "Tu spoczywa serce Fryderyka Chopina. Here rests the heart of Frederick Chopin." A few years ago, there's another story that Jackie pulled me out at a Chopinian event and asked me to give, and I'm not going to repeat it now because many of you heard it. About in the year 2014, they did a secret investigation of Chopin's heart in that pillar. And they removed it and did some tests to try to find out what Chopin actually died of. And it was done at midnight with the Archbishop of Warsaw and several priests and several scientists, all in observance. But there's one interesting and ironic twist to the story of Chopin's heart. As you know, beginning in August of 1944, for 63 days, a Polish home army, the Armia Krajowa, led the Warsaw Uprising in an attempt to liberate Warsaw from the German army. After the uprising failed to drive out the Germans, the German army took revenge on the Poles, killing 200,000 Poles in Warsaw and destroying the city block by block. All this while the Soviet army was across the Wisła River watching everything happen and not assisting. The Holy Cross Church, like so many other buildings and churches in Warsaw, was bombed and destroyed by the Germans as they were leaving Warsaw. So you may wonder then, why was it that Chopin's heart survived? Why wasn't it also blown up together with the church? It turns out that just before the Holy Cross Church was to be bombed, General Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, German general, had Chopin's heart removed from the church for safekeeping. This general, who was a devout Nazi and SS officer appointed by Heinrich Himmler himself as the commander of the German forces in Warsaw during the uprising, turned out to be a music lover and an admirer of Chopin's music. Ironically, it was the same general to supervise the killing of the 200,000 Poles during the Warsaw Uprising and the destruction of the city. He saw to it, though, that Chopin's heart was preserved from all. After the war, shortly after the war in 1945, the heart was returned to the church. And the reason I read the story of the journey of Chopin's heart is because it's a useful metaphor on a couple levels. It illustrates that although Chopin died in exile, his soul and his music never left Poland. It also illustrates that throughout Poland's history, whether or not they realize it, even the worst enemies and oppressors of Poland can never extinguish the Polish spirit and nation, as symbolized by Chopin's heart. And that's why we're gathered here today, to celebrate the American Polish Cultural Society, in keeping our beautiful Polish culture alive, and in celebrating one of Poland's great sons, Frederick Chopin. So thank you, officers, directors, and staff of the American Polish Cultural Society, for all you do in fulfilling the mission of the AECS. And thank you all for coming today to be part of that mission